The morning sun struggled to break through the concrete canyons of New York City. It was one of those crisp, unforgiving mornings, the kind that made people walk faster, breathe shorter, and avoid eye contact. The streets pulsed with impatience, coffee cups in hand, horns blaring, shoes clicking against the pavement like clockwork. On the corner of Fifth Avenue, tucked beside a marble pillar, sat Elena. Her coat was torn at the seams, her gloves mismatched, but her eyes, sharp and blue as winter glass, held a quiet intelligence. Beside her lay a worn cardboard sign, hungry but hopeful. Each passerby glanced, then looked away. That practiced city blindness people use to protect themselves from guilt. But Elena didn't beg. She didn't even speak. She just watched the world rush past her as if trying to memorize humanity in motion. Then a black luxury car stopped at the curb. The door opened and out stepped Alexander Cole, billionaire investor, tech genius, and headline magnate. Perfectly tailored suit, silver cufflinks, expression colder than the morning wind. He was talking sharply into his phone. "No, Jacques, you're not listening. We can't finalize the deal unless we get clarity." He switched between English and broken French, struggling to make sense of the man on the other end. His voice rose with irritation. The people nearby glanced, whispering. It wasn't every day they saw a billionaire arguing on the sidewalk. Alexander sighed, ending the call. He looked around, frustrated, muttering, "I hate this city sometimes." Just then, from the sidewalk, a calm voice said, "He said he'll send the new documents by Monday morning. You just need to confirm your signature." Alexander turned sharply. His eyes met Elena's, the woman sitting beside the pillar. For a moment, he thought he misheard. "Excuse me?" She smiled faintly. "The man on the phone, it's your client, right?" He said Monday. His accent was from Lyon, not Paris. They speak faster there. Alexander stared at her, confusion etched on his face. "You understood that?" She nodded. "French, yes. Also Spanish, German, Italian, and Russian. I used to work as a translator before." Life changed. Alexander blinked. You speak 5 languages?" Elena chuckled softly. 6 if you count sarcasm." That line caught him off guard. For the first time that morning, he smiled. He studied her. Not as a passerby, not as a billionaire, but as a human. Beneath the dirt and the torn coat, he saw something rare. Dignity. Intelligence. He hesitated, then asked, "What are you doing out here?" Elena looked down, tracing a circle on the ground with her finger. "Trying to stay warm," she said softly, "and maybe to remind myself that I still exist." A gust of wind swept between them, carrying the sound of sirens and distant laughter. Alexander's phone buzzed again, but he didn't answer. Something about her tone, her eyes, her composure. It disarmed him. He sat down on the edge of the planter beside her. "You're not what I expected to find on this corner," he said. Elena smiled gently. "Neither are you." For the first time that day, Alexander Cole, a man who owned companies, skyscrapers, and headlines, sat in silence beside someone who owned nothing but her stories. And strangely, it felt grounding. The city kept moving, indifferent as always. But in that one frozen frame, a billionaire and a homeless woman, something invisible shifted. 2 worlds that never touched did. The wind picked up, scattering old newspapers down the street. Alexander's driver waited by the car, confused. Billionaires didn't usually sit beside strangers on sidewalks. But Alexander wasn't moving. There was something magnetic about the woman in front of him. He asked quietly, "How did someone like you end up here?" Elena hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the busy street, to the reflection of herself in a passing window. "That's a long story," she said softly. "I have time," Alexander replied. She let out a quiet laugh, the kind that's half memory, half pain. No one ever says that anymore. Then with a sigh she began. "I used to work for the United Nations," she said. "A translator for international conferences. French was my specialty, but I spoke a bit of everything. My husband Daniel was a diplomat. We met in Geneva. He used to call me the bridge, because I could connect anyone through words." Her hands, cracked and pale, gestured gently as she spoke, painting invisible scenes in the cold air. "We lived in 6 countries in 7 years. I met presidents, scholars, even poets. But then Daniel's heart gave out during a trip to Moscow. I was thousands of miles away on assignment. By the time I got to him, all I could translate were the hospital forms. Her voice broke slightly. She paused, swallowing hard. Alexander looked down, unsure what to say. For a man used to solving billion-dollar problems, grief felt like a language he didn't know. I tried to go back to work, she continued. But depression doesn't look good on a resume. The world moved on, jobs vanished, savings disappeared. One day I woke up and my apartment was gone too. It's funny, she said, smiling faintly. I used to translate between governments, but I couldn't translate my pain into words anyone wanted to hear. The air around them felt still, as if even the city had stopped to listen. Alexander asked softly, "And now you just stay here every day?" Elena nodded. "Every morning I come to this spot. I listen to people, tourists, workers, immigrants. I hear 1,000 lives pass by. Sometimes I help translate when someone gets lost. Sometimes I just listen. It reminds me I'm still part of the world, even if the world forgot me." A silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of traffic and distant chatter. Alexander looked at her again. Really looked. Not as a homeless woman, not as a stranger, but as a mirror. He realized that for all his wealth, he had been running from loneliness too. He lived in penthouses surrounded by people, yet no one truly heard him. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his wallet, and hesitated. He started. Elena interrupted gently. "Please don't, I'm not asking for money. I just wanted someone to listen without looking away." Alexander froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his board members, not his assistants, not even his so-called friends. He put the wallet away slowly, eyes softening. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've spent years talking to people who only hear my last name, not my words. For a long moment, they just sat there, two souls from opposite worlds, sharing the same silence." Then Elena reached into a small bag beside her and pulled out a battered, weathered book, its cover torn, pages yellowed. "Le Petit Prince. This is the only thing I kept," she said. "It reminds me that even in the smallest things there's meaning. That language isn't just about words. It's about understanding." Alexander smiled faintly. "I read that book as a child." "Then you know," she replied softly. "The most important things are invisible to the eye." Her words hit him like a quiet revelation. For the first time in years, Alexander felt seen. Not as a billionaire, but as a person. He stood slowly. "Come with me," he said. Elena shook her head. "I'm not sure I can." "Please," he insisted. "I just want to talk. Somewhere warm." She hesitated, then gathered her few belongings. As they walked together down Fifth Avenue, people stared. A billionaire walking side by side with a homeless woman. An image that didn't fit the world's script. But maybe that's why it mattered. As they disappeared into the crowd, the driver closed the car door and whispered to himself, "He's changing." The cafe was warm and bright, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and chatter. Elena sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, her first real one in months. She stared at the rising steam, almost disbelieving that she was here. Across from her sat Alexander Cole, no longer the hurried billionaire from the sidewalk. His phone lay face down on the table, a rare gesture of undivided attention. He studied her like an unsolved puzzle. "So," he began, "you really understand all those languages?" Elena smiled softly. "Words are like people, Mr. Cole. If you listen long enough, they'll tell you who they are." He nodded thoughtfully, then leaned forward. "Let's test that, shall we?" He unlocked his phone and opened a voice message. "This is from my client in France. We've been trying to fix a deal for months. Maybe you can help." He pressed play. A man's voice filled the space, rapid French, agitated, full of frustration. Elena's expression didn't change. She listened carefully, every breath of the speaker reflected in her eyes. When the message ended, she took a sip of her coffee, set the cup down, and said, "He's not angry about the deal. He's angry about you. You spoke to him through an assistant last week and he took it as an insult. He thinks you don't respect him." Alexander blinked. "That's impossible." Elena raised a hand gently. He said, "L'argent n'achète pas la considération." Money doesn't buy respect. That's what he feels. Alexander leaned back, stunned. She wasn't just translating words. She was translating emotion. "You're right," he said slowly. "He actually mentioned something like that in our first call. My assistant forgot to follow up." Elena smiled faintly. People forget that tone is a language too. Silence can insult as much as a word. The cafe fell quiet around them for a moment. Alexander stared at her, his mind racing. All the corporate translators he'd ever hired couldn't catch what she just did. He decided to push further. He opened another recording, this time a German voice, low and serious. "This one's about an investment proposal," he said. Elena listened again. After a few seconds, she chuckled lightly. "He's bluffing. He says he wants a partnership, but he's actually trying to test your confidence. Notice how he emphasizes Sicherheit, security. He's waiting to see if you'll flinch." Alexander tilted his head. "How do you even know that?" She smiled. "Because that's how fear speaks in any language." For the first time, Alexander felt something unfamiliar, humility. The woman sitting before him had no company, no team, no wealth. Yet in 10 minutes, she had solved what weeks of meetings couldn't. He looked down at his phone and said softly, "You should be running a department, not sitting on a sidewalk." Elena laughed, shaking her head. "I used to believe that too. But you'd be surprised how fast people forget your worth when life takes away your title." There was silence between them again, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Alexander felt an ache in his chest, a realization he couldn't ignore. He looked at her hands, steady, graceful, and strong despite the cold. "What if I told you," he said carefully, "that I could offer you a position? Not charity, a job. Translating, consulting, whatever you'd like." Elena's eyes widened, then softened. "Why?" Alexander took a breath. "Because you see what others don't, because you listen, and because I think I've forgotten how." She smiled, a small trembling smile that seemed to light the air around her. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded you." At that moment, the cafe door opened. A gust of cold wind swept in, carrying the distant hum of the city. Outside, people hurried past, unaware that inside, 2 lives had just changed direction. Alexander's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Instead, he said, "There's a conference tomorrow." My communications director backed out. "If you're willing, I could use your help." Elena hesitated only a second, then nodded. "All right. But only if you promise to stop calling me miss. It makes me feel like I'm translating for a king." He laughed. "Deal, Elena." As they left the cafe together, the barista watched through the fogged window, the billionaire and the woman who'd once sat invisible on the sidewalk. Outside, the snow had started to fall, covering the streets in soft white. 2 footprints trailed side by side, slowly fading into the light. The morning light spilled across the glass towers of Manhattan like liquid gold. Inside one of those towers, Coal Industries' headquarters, and a new day was beginning. Employees moved briskly through the lobby, coffee in hand, murmuring about deadlines and meetings. But today something was different. The revolving doors opened, and Elena stepped inside. Her hair was neatly brushed, her white blouse crisp, and around her neck hung a simple ID card that read, "Elena Ramirez, Global Communications Consultant." For a brief second, she paused, staring at her reflection in the polished marble floor. She barely recognized herself, not because of the clothes, but because of the calm confidence in her eyes. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "You made it." It was Alexander. He approached with a genuine smile. Not the corporate one he wore for cameras, but a warm, human smile. "Ready for your first day?" She nodded, returning the smile. "I've been ready my whole life." They walked together toward the elevator. As the door slid open, Alexander glanced at her. "You know, the board doesn't quite understand why I hired you. Some think I've lost my mind," Elena chuckled. "Then maybe it's about time they found theirs." He laughed, and for the first time in years it was real, unguarded. Inside the conference room on the 38th floor, a dozen executives sat waiting. Papers rustled, screens flickered, tension filled the air. A video call was about to start. Alexander's long-delayed negotiation with the French client who'd nearly walked away. The screen came alive. The French businessman appeared, expression cautious but curious. Alexander greeted him in English. Polite, rehearsed. Then he looked at Elena. Without missing a beat, she stepped forward and greeted the man in perfect French, fluid, warm, respectful. Her tone carried not just words, but empathy. The man's face softened immediately. "Monsieur Cole has great respect for your partnership," she said, translating as Alexander spoke. "He hopes to build not just a business, but a bridge." When the call ended, the client was smiling. The deal was restored. The executives broke into applause. But Elena simply stepped back, hands clasped, her expression serene. Alexander turned to her and said quietly, "You didn't just translate words today. You translated trust," she smiled. "That's all communication really is. Understanding without judgment." Later that day, Alexander stood by the window of his office, looking down at the city below. For years, that view had meant success. Skyscrapers, power, control. But now it looked different. It looked like possibility. Elena knocked lightly on the door. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," he said, turning. "You told me once that languages connect people." "You were right. I've been building companies my whole life, but none of them connected hearts. Until now." He handed her a folder. Inside was a proposal titled The Bridge Project. "What's this?" she asked. "A global initiative," he explained. "Free language and communication programs for underprivileged communities. I want you to run it." Elena's eyes widened. "Me?" Alexander nodded. "Who better? You know what it's like to lose a voice and to find it again." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "You just did." Weeks later, the first Bridge Project class opened in a modest community center in Brooklyn. Elena stood before a group of students, men and women from every corner of the world. Some spoke little English, others none at all. She smiled at them and began in slow, careful phrases, switching languages effortlessly, laughter and curiosity filling the room. On the back wall hung a quote she'd written herself. "Language isn't what separates us. It's what reminds us we're the same." Alexander watched from the doorway, unseen pride softening his expression. Outside, the city buzzed with life. The world hadn't changed overnight, but for one woman, and one man who had finally learned to listen, it had changed forever. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Elena sat on a park bench, the same corner where her story had begun. The cardboard sign was gone. In its place lay her old book, Le Petit Prince. She opened it and traced a line on the page. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly." A voice behind her said, "You look happier." She turned to find Alexander holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat beside her. They watched the city lights flicker on, thousands of tiny translations between darkness and hope. Elena took a sip and smiled. "You know, it's funny." "What is?" he asked. "I used to think I'd lost everything," she said softly, "but I was just waiting for the right person to understand my language." Alexander nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," she said, eyes glimmering. "I help others find theirs." The camera slowly panned out, 2 figures sitting side by side, laughter mixing with the hum of the city. New York stretched out before them, glowing like 1,000 untold stories. And beneath the noise, beneath the lights, one quiet truth lingered, that sometimes the richest people are the ones who finally learn to listen.